Ned sighed. "We will claim the boy as my bastard, Jon Snow. Lyanna wants to keep him close, but she has no wish to pass him off as yours. She knows that's impossible, and she knows you hate the Targaryen name too fiercely for the child to ever be safe, if the truth were known. So let the world believe what it will, that Ned Stark fathered a child out of wedlock, and that Lyanna, out of pity or shame, took him in. It is not so strange a tale." Robert closed his eyes and drew a long breath. "She told me she still wants to marry me," he whispered. "She said she has no love left for Rhaegar, that he betrayed her and destroyed everything she held dear. But I look at her, and all I can think is that Targaryen inside her used her." He grimaced. "And now I'm to wed her, and let that child live under my roof?" Ned felt a flare of anger. "The child is innocent, Robert. You said yourself Rhaegar is dead. What purpose does hatred serve now?" Robert's fury flared again, but at last he let out a ragged sigh. "None, I suppose." He stared at the ground, as though searching for answers there. "I loved her once. I still do. I thought her dead, and nearly drowned in grief. I have dreamt of her every night for months. Now she stands before me, real as the day. I want to protect her, to keep her safe. That is all I ever wanted." Ned put a hand on Robert's broad shoulder. "Then do that. Marry her if she will have you. Protect her. Let the boy live. That is what she wants. She is a Stark, your friend's sister, the woman you have always loved." Robert's shoulders slumped. He said, voice subdued. "I will. I have no taste to break her heart anew. If she'll have me, then so be it." And so a fragile agreement was reached. Lyanna Stark would marry Robert Baratheon, as had once been arranged. The child, Jon, would be presented to the realm as Ned Stark's bastard, conceived in the chaos of the war, and left motherless for reasons never fully explained. Lyanna would keep the boy close, but she would never name him as her own son, at least not in public. Ned doubted the official story would fool everyone, but no lord or lady would dare challenge House Stark's word without proof. Catelyn, though wounded by the knowledge that Ned had returned with a bastard, would have to swallow her pride. Quietly, rumor spread that the new king, Robert had been crowned shortly after the war, was preparing to wed Lyanna Stark. The wedding would take place at the Great Septon River Run, a smaller ceremony than might have been expected of a royal wedding, given the war and the losses suffered. Still, many great lords came to witness the union that would bind House Baratheon and House Stark. Jon Arryn and Stannis Baratheon were both in attendance, as were many northern lords who had followed Ned into war. Tywin Lannister was absent, still seething over the crown's treatment of his daughter Cersei, who had once been rumored to wed Rhaegar. But the presence of the other lords signaled that the realm was ready to unify around Robert. Lyanna faced the wedding day with a quiet, grave resolve. She wore a simple gown of gray and white, the colors of her house, though a collar of sapphires at her throat reminded all of the betrothal that once had been overshadowed by the kidnapping at Harrenhal. She was still pale from her illness, but the fever had left her, and she looked more like herself than she had in weeks. Her hair, brushed out in shining waves, fell to her waist. Some said she looked like a winter goddess, ethereal and sad. When Robert saw her at the altar, his face flickered with an emotion Ned could not name, something between longing and regret. He was not the same man he had been before the war either. The battles, the losses, and the knowledge of Rhaegar's final betrayal weighed on him. Yet when they clasped hands to be wed, Robert's grip was gentle. Lyanna did not recoil. The High Septon performed the rites, while the lords and ladies watched. The bride and groom exchanged vows, speaking words that bound them before the gods and the realm. Robert's voice shook a little, but Lyanna's was clear and steady, as if she'd found strength in necessity. When the ceremony concluded, Robert leaned in to kiss her, and she allowed it. A great cheer went up, horns blasted, and the realm's newest power couple was sealed in marriage. In the feasting that followed, Ned could see that Robert made a genuine effort to be kind and attentive to Lyanna. She responded with quiet politeness, though occasionally Ned glimpsed flickers of sadness in her eyes. It would take time for old wounds to heal if they ever did. But for now, appearances were maintained. The union of House Stark and House Baratheon was official, and the realm exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Peace, fragile though it was, seemed within reach. Jon Arryn's wise counsel guided Robert through the intricacies of forming a new small council, pacifying the lords who had sided with the Targaryens, and distributing rewards to those who had fought for the rebellion. Ned watched with mild unease as lands and titles were granted, allies appeased, and enemies punished. But the North was left relatively untouched. Ned was confirmed as Warden of the North, though, with his father and brother gone, Winterfell felt strangely empty. After the wedding, Robert lingered at Riverrun for a while longer, presumably to be with his new bride and attend to the aftermath of war. The child, Jon Snow, remained quietly in Ned's care, publicly at least, but Lyanna visited him often, sneaking into the nursery whenever she could. The babe always lit up at the sight of her, as though some innate bond recognized his mother's presence. She would cradle him close, humming soft lullabies. Sometimes Ned witnessed her whispering words he could not fully hear, tears glistening on her cheeks. It was a secret arrangement. Robert did not visit the boy, and Lyanna was careful not to flaunt her affections in front of anyone who might talk. But Ned suspected that Robert had guessed or been told more than he let on. Why else would the new king keep his distance from a nephew by name, if not to avoid the child's real parentage? In any case, Robert turned a blind eye, or perhaps simply could not bring himself to look too closely at the boy who bore the blood of his greatest enemy. Weeks bled into months. The realm settled into an uneasy peace. News came that Viserys and his newborn sister Daenerys Targaryen had fled across the Narrow Sea, rumored to be in the care of exiled loyalists. Some whispered that Robert might sail after them, but his advisors counseled otherwise. The realm was weary of war. Best to let the last Targaryen children starve abroad, or so went the argument. Robert, though never short of anger for Targaryens, did not have the ships or the coin for another campaign, and so the exiles were left to their fate. At last, Ned indicated that he needed to return to Winterfell. King Robert, with Queen Lyanna by his side, would travel to King's Landing to be crowned in a more elaborate ceremony. Then Robert would begin his reign in earnest, and Lyanna would act as queen, forging alliances and presiding over court. She did not seem enthused by the thought. King's Landing had too many memories of rigor, too much history of Targaryen rule. But she would do her duty, as a Stark raised to honor commitments. Ned wondered if the southern climate would suit her, or if she might waste away in that scorching city the way a snowflake vanished on a hot stone. Before Ned departed, he and Lyanna had a final, quiet talk. They stood by the nursery window watching baby Jon sleep. Outside, the river Trident sparkled in the distance, like a ribbon of silver in the midday sun. Lyanna wore a simple gown of deep blue, her hair pinned back in a modest style that suited a queen in waiting, not the wild wolf girl of Ned's memories. "I'll see that you have chances to visit him," Ned said softly. "You'll be in King's Landing, but whenever the court travels north, I promise Jon will be there. And he can come south if it's safe." Lyanna nodded, her gaze never leaving the child's slumbering form. "Thank you, Ned," she whispered. Then her voice broke with emotion. "He'll never call me mother. I'll never hear him say that word." Ned's heart twisted. "Perhaps in private." She shook her head, blinking back tears. "It's too dangerous. Robert might be able to set aside his anger, but only to a point. I'll never risk it." Her shoulders trembled as she fought not to sob. Ned gently set a hand on her arm. "He'll be safe, I swear it. I'll raise him as my own. He'll have food and comfort, and he'll learn the ways of the North. He'll grow strong, like a Stark." Lyanna closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "He has a wolf's blood," she said softly, "but also a dragon's. I hope that doesn't bring him pain someday." Ned, not knowing what else to say, simply squeezed her arm. Then Lyanna turned to him and embraced him fiercely, her tears dampening his cloak. He held her, remembering the little girl who had once outridden him through the wolfswood, laughing at his attempts to keep up. That girl seemed so far away now. War had changed them all. When they parted, Lyanna composed herself, wiping her eyes. "You will be a good father to him," she said. Better than any Targaryen would have been." Ned nodded. "He is a Stark." With that, Ned departed Riverrun, taking baby Jon with him, along with Catelyn and a retinue of loyal men. Howland Reed returned to the Neck, promising to keep the secret. The journey north was long, but it passed without incident. Rumors trailed Ned's party. Whispers that the new king had wed the Stark girl, that Ned had fathered a bastard, that the child was an ill omen or the product of some scandal. Most accepted the simple explanation that Ned Stark had a son by another woman, and that the boy's mother had died in childbirth. Some pitted Catelyn Tully for having to raise her husband's bastard in her household. Others shrugged, for bastardy was not uncommon in times of war. Winterfell's gray walls loomed at last, and Ned felt a wave of sorrow for the father and brother he had lost. The yard seemed emptier now, the world quieter, as though in mourning. But life went on. Servants bustled, the blacksmith's hammer rang, and the kennel master's hounds barked. Ned carried Jon Snow in his arms through the gates, greeting those who bowed or curtsied to welcome him. Catelyn maintained her composure. She did not complain or speak ill of Jon, but Ned could sense a distance forming between them. She would do her duty, he knew. She was a Tully, raised to uphold her own sense of honor. Yet each time she looked at the dark-haired baby, something in her eyes tightened, as if reminded of her husband's indiscretion. Ned did not fault her for it. She believed he had lied with another woman, after all. He could not tell her the truth, not without endangering Jon and Lyanna both, so they settled into life at Winterfell. Ned's sister was now the queen of the Seven Kingdoms, while the child she had borne in secret was being raised as Ned's bastard far to the north. The arrangement felt delicate, as though a single rumor or slip could topple it all. But Ned was determined to keep his promise. Back in King's Landing, Lyanna Stark, now Lyanna Baratheon, stepped into her role as queen. The city, battered by war, seethed with intrigues. Lords jockeyed for position, gold cloaks patrolled the streets, and the Red Keep bore the marks of the sack. The Iron Throne was Robert's, though some said it rightfully belonged to Viserys Targaryen across the sea. But the realm was tired of Targaryens, or so the small folk claimed, and for the most part Robert's reign was welcomed, especially with Lyanna, the Wolf Queen, by his side. Still, the new queen's presence stirred controversy. Courtiers who had once expected a queen from the Westerlands or the Reach found themselves at the feet of a northern woman who had little patience for southern niceties. Lyanna was polite enough, but she was no meek lady to be toyed with, and though she never publicly spoke of her captivity, or the child she had borne, rumors bubbled in the shadows. Some swore she moved through the Red Keep's halls like a restless ghost, haunted by what had happened. Others noted that Robert was often found in the company of wine and newly made friends, frequently drinking late into the night, as though to drown old memories. Yet, on formal occasions, they appeared a united front. The king in his black and gold, the queen in stark gray or Baratheon blue. They presided over tournaments and feasts, forging alliances with cautious skill. Jon Arryn, as Hand of the King, took on much of the governance, while Stannis Baratheon oversaw the royal fleet. Renly, still young, admired his brother's new status, and grew fond of Queen Lyanna, who treated him with a distant sort of kindness. Sometimes, Lyanna rode out with her guard, swift as a deer on the city roads, ignoring the stares of those unaccustomed to seeing their queen so unladylike. Whispers circulated that she had once ridden as well as any knight, that she had the boldness of a she-wolf. Some found it scandalous, others admired her spirit. As time passed, the cracks in the royal marriage became more evident. Robert tried to be a dutiful husband, tried to shower Lyanna with gifts, fine dresses, jewels, a crown of winter roses to match the story of how he had first fallen for her. He even commissioned a statue of her in the Red Keep's gardens. But there was always an unspoken chasm between them. The ghost of Rhaegar, the knowledge that Lyanna had been forced to carry his child. The Targaryen name was never spoken, but it hovered like a specter. Sometimes, when Robert drank, he could not help but rage about dragon spawn, though never in Lyanna's presence. And there were nights when Lyanna woke from nightmares, feeling Rhaegar's presence as though it still lingered in her mind, remembering the tower where she nearly died. Despite the tension, the realm seemed stable enough. Trade resumed, crops were harvested, and lords who had once bent the knee to the Mad King turned their allegiance to the new monarch. Peace, if not happiness, was the order of the day. And far away in the north, Jon Snow grew day by day, beloved by the servants and watched over by a man who claimed to be his father. He took his first steps in Winterfell's halls, babbled his first words near the heart tree in the Godswood. Ned found himself growing fond of the child, not just out of duty but genuine affection. The boy was quiet, observant. He had Lyanna's stubbornness, and, in his own small way, a sense of honor that shone in those gray eyes. Each time Ned looked at him, he felt the weight of his promise, but also a flicker of hope for the future. Seasons turned, and letters went back and forth between King's Landing and Winterfell. Lyanna wrote occasionally to Ned in a secret cipher, asking after the boy, though she rarely had time to do so. She asked if he was healthy, if he was learning his letters, and Ned answered each question with care, describing Jon's progress and small childhood mischiefs. The letters were short, but they sustained her. Though she never once referred to him as "my son" in ink, Ned read the longing in her words. Robert, for his part, sank deeper into the complexities of rule, and deeper into the flagons of wine that were ever present in the Red Keep. He was not yet the rotund, boisterous king that some would later whisper about, but he was no longer the same warrior who had taken the field at the Trident. He and Lyanna tried to produce an heir, but no child came of their union, at least not in the first few years. This failure weighed on Robert, stoking his insecurities and fueling further nights of heavy drinking. Meanwhile, the court began to murmur about the queen's fertility, or lack thereof. The maesters said there was no obvious impediment. Sometimes the gods simply withheld their gifts for a while. Others suspected that some hidden sorrow gnawed at Lyanna, preventing her from welcoming new life. When visitors from the north came to King's Landing, they brought news of Ned, of the young boy Jon Snow, and of the wolves that still roamed the Wolfswood. Lyanna would listen with rapt attention, carefully disguised as polite interest. She never asked after Jon openly, but sometimes she'd find a moment alone with a loyal retainer and ask, in careful whispers, how he fared. Each bit of news was a treasure she locked away in her heart. She learned that Jon had taken an interest in exploring the hidden corners of Winterfell, that he'd once slipped away to climb the broken tower and given the guards a fright. She learned that he wore a small wooden sword around the yard and tried to imitate the older boys as they trained. Lyanna would smile at these tales, though sadness filled her eyes. Robert noticed her moments of distant reflection, but he never pressed her on it, perhaps fearing the answers. Their relationship had settled into a tenuous peace. They were cordial in public, careful with each other in private. Sometimes they shared a bed, other times they did not. The realm's well-being took priority over their personal feelings, for both were proud and stoic in their own ways. Years slipped by, marked by the turning of the seasons and the slow aging of both man and wolf. Jon was 4 when he first asked Ned why he was called Snow. Ned gently explained that bastards in the north bore that name, and Jon, with a child's frankness, asked what a bastard was. Ned, caught off guard, said simply that it meant he had been born out of wedlock, but that it did not make him any less loved. Jon took this explanation in stride, though a flicker of confusion crossed his eyes. "Are you sure you love me, father?" he asked, voice small. Ned's heart broke a little at the question, and he scooped the boy into his arms. "Of course I do," he said, hugging him fiercely. "I love you as my son, always." And Jon, who had no reason to doubt, believed him. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Lyanna endured the labyrinth of court politics, hosting feasts, receiving envoys, and trying to advise Robert where she could. She insisted on certain northern customs being upheld in the Red Keep. Once a month, she had the kitchen serve stewed venison with thick gravy, a dish that reminded her of home. She introduced boar hunts in the Kingswood, sometimes riding alongside Robert when he felt inclined to hunt. For a time, it seemed the couple had found a measure of companionship. But as the years continued without a child from their union, the tension returned. Gossip about the queen's barren womb began to ripple through the court. Robert, sensitive to such rumors, clamped down on any who dared spread them openly, but the whispers persisted. Lyanna wrote to Ned more often during this period, confiding her fears that she would never conceive another child. "I gave birth once," she wrote in one letter, "but it was not Robert's. Now I wonder if the gods are punishing me for that, if they will deny me a true-born child, in penance for the secrets we keep." Ned replied with reassurances, reminding her that the gods' will was mysterious, and that she should not lose hope. But he had no true answer. He only hoped that time would heal all wounds.